Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation with investigative producer Randall Kerr, we're going to talk about the high cost of higher education, specifically in the UNC system, which seems to be getting higher. Welcome to the program, Randall. So as someone who has a student in college, and I'm the parent of a recent graduate, it is really hard to wrap your head around this. I mean, the cost of higher education has just skyrocketed. And, you know, we are lucky to have 16 choices of public schools here in North Carolina to choose from. But it does feel like it just keeps going up and up and up. How would you compare the cost today at the public universities compared to what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, sticker shock for most parents. Absolutely. I know I went to a UNC system school and I was out of state, and my full tuition bill was probably a tenth of what in-state tuition is now for students. And they range in-state. The research that we did, these are all numbers through the U.S. Department of Education. It was an in-state student living on campus, so freshman, because you have to live on campus, you have to have the meal plan. What's the total cost? NC State is the most expensive school in the system, which may surprise a lot of people.
What is the cost of NC State?
State, I believe, was around 24 to 27,000 total.
And then UNC?
UNC, the other ones that were expensive that surprised me a little bit, UNCW has gone up a lot over the years, and North Carolina Central has gone up a ton, which really surprised me.
So in your research, what did you find out about the reasons for this cost increase?
Everyone has their own theory. We did speak with one economist who basically said it's an issue of supply and demand, and the idea that college is a golden ticket. And that's been beaten in children's heads over the past, 10 years or so, really more so than even when we were kids.
Like you have to have a college degree to
succeed. If you want to be
succeed.
successful, you have to have a degree. And it's a supply and demand issue. And schools can charge whatever they want to charge because they know even if the price goes up, they may price out 10, but they're still going to have 40 kids waiting in line to take that one spot.
And yet we do know, especially in the tech world, there's a lot of people with a special skill set that don't necessarily go to college. So at some point, this has got to, I would think it's got to level out.
Yeah, and that goes back to the supply and demand. They think that, once parents and students start saying, hey, look, this is just too much for us, we can't do it, that's really the only driving force on college prices and within the UNC system. I know one aspect that we looked at kind of on the side, my reporter, Cullen Browder, his wife is a teacher at Wake Tech. And she talked about the changing demographics that she's seen over the past 5 to 10 years, where usually people thought of community colleges as trade schools, secondary education for adults. And she says the makeup of her classrooms have become younger and younger and younger and younger over the years, where students have just decided they can't afford 4 years of public school. You can go to a community college for 2 years, get all of your core classes done. I think Wake Tech is $1,200. You can take 12 hours a semester and have your freshman and sophomore year done. And if that trend continues, that could also help drive down some prices.
Right, because that's much more reasonable. So you mentioned some of the specific schools in the North Carolina system that saw bigger increases than others. Anything about those specific schools? Any reasoning behind that? You mentioned NC State, NC Central.
Yeah. Now, the Central is interesting because I'll go back. I'll take a step back and talk about the research that we did, how we came out with the numbers that we did. So the Department of Education has a database where you can search by system, by school, whatever. So I went back and I got 20 years of in-state tuition data, and I'm using tuition freely. That's tuition and room and board, just it's the cost of attendance. And we went back 20 years and looked at the trends. And then from that 2002 year, I added inflation for every year to see, okay, if tuition just stuck with inflation, this is what the cost should be. And, it wasn't. It's still much higher, even with inflation taken into account. We were also told that part of the reason the cost is being passed on to families is that there's been less state funding for systems. So we also compared state budgets for academic affairs to all the UNC system schools over 20 years and what their attendance was each of those years. So basically, how much was each school getting per student over those 20 years? And some schools, obviously the recession that we had, it was 1 in 3, the 08-09 area, we saw some dips in funding, but by now they've certainly rebounded. And the cost per pupil at most schools, what they're getting from the state, is higher than it was 20 years ago, or at least very comparable. And if they had a decrease in per pupil spending, we assumed that would be a fair cost to pass on to families. You could say, look, we're not getting the money that we used to. We have to have that money from somewhere. But that wasn't the case either.
So how did the universities respond to this? I mean, I'm sure you reached out to them.
Sure. Yeah, we interviewed someone with the UNC system, and I'll be fair. If you look at our public school system of higher education, cost relative, it is a fantastic deal compared to other states. I mean, so in-state in Virginia, in-state in South Carolina, our system is outperforming those systems when it comes to student success and cost.
So we're doing better than other states, but we're still seeing these increases.
Yeah, and I think one of the most disturbing things that I found, is because you can factor in inflation, but if you look at what a family's median income is, that doesn't matter whether it's inflation adjusted or not. Right now, if you want to attend NC State, it is 42% of the median household income in North Carolina to attend.
That's out of this world.
I mean, half of a family's income.
That puts it in perspective.
It's really, really frightening. And 20 years ago, it was closer to 30% or a little bit lower, but that 10% is a big difference, especially when you consider how the actual cost has gone up so much. That's a lot of money.
Absolutely. So we'll be back after the break with more from Randall Kerr on how community colleges are helping to offset some of these tuition hikes. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with Randall Kerr about the skyrocketing cost of higher education. So we mentioned this in the first half, but, the tuition at public universities has gone up so much here in North Carolina and across the country and seems to be getting outrageous in some cases. We do have strong community colleges here in North Carolina. You mentioned Wake Tech, but we have them in almost every county, correct?
Correct.
And so I guess what you've heard from your research and from people you've talked to is that, hey, you know what? This is a good option for 2 years.
Absolutely. I think the stigma is gone with community colleges, where people used to look at it, as we mentioned, as a trade school or secondary education. That stigma is gone. And I think one thing that's really changed over the past few years, and it has to do with leadership over at UNC and the community college system, those two units are working together better now than they probably have in our state's history. And one of the key components that we found is that there was always confusion if you went to a community college and then you wanted to transfer over to a public school your junior year. What does and doesn't transfer as far as your credit hours? So they've actually built a system, and it's all online, where they've tried to use the exact same class numbers across the UNC and community college system. So English 101 is English 101 everywhere.
So that really is helpful because it makes it clear to students, I'm taking courses that will give me credit at a four-year university.
And you can go on this website and type in, search for the classes that you're taking at a community college, and then look across the line and figure out where that transfers, if it goes to every school in the UNC system or which school you're looking at. So if community college is your best avenue to at least get started, where you can go and really knock out your first 2 years.
So what role does financial aid and scholarships play in helping some of these students afford a four-year university?
They play a big role. I mean, the UNC system, made it very clear that there is extra money, and they try to make it as easy as possible. I mean, as a parent, we've both looked at what scholarships were out there applying to them. It's a very tedious task. They do try to they're trying to simplify that process to help people. Financial aid also is out there, but the thought of, college loans scare a lot of people also, especially at these costs. So they do play a role. One thing that I believe, I can't remember which publication it was, years ago, there was a story about bureaucracy within the UNC system, how you had, management on top of management on top of management, and that's a lot of salary costs. One of the things that we have heard is administration has grown at schools, but it's needed because schools, this is a good thing, schools are actually serving more quote unquote needy students. More students who probably couldn't go to college before are going to college now, partly because of that financial aid and some of the scholarship opportunities.
And probably a lot of first generation.
But those students, the school system has found, also need more support. So you have more student support staff, which of course is more payroll money. Bill, and then so that gets passed on to everyone.
So what are you hearing from families about kids getting a 4-year degree? Are some people saying, you know what, I'm just going to go work, or, I'm going to take some time off because this is crazy?
Yeah, it's interesting. We interviewed a parent who's actually, he sees it from every aspect. He's a non-faculty employee at State. He actually works with high school age students and younger, who many of them, like we talked about, are going to be first degree or want to be first-time generational college attendees. And his whole program is getting these kids from lower income areas, creating basically a college resume for them. They take headshots, so they have things to put on their LinkedIn pages. And he says that there are students that he deals with, and he relayed stories to us from some of his kids who, their dream is to go to college, and they got to a point where they just looked at the cost and said, I can't do it. And a couple of them ended up going to Wake Tech instead. He told us about one mother who wanted so badly to send her student to a UNC system school that she took money out of her 401k and actually got punished for that, and it made her ineligible for the financial aid that would have helped pay for the college bill.
Wow. And this situation means that some of the best and the brightest kids who just don't have the money may not be able to go to college. And obviously, you want the best and the brightest kids to go to college in North Carolina. You want all kids to have that opportunity. We talked a little bit before we started about both of us being parents kind of in the same range of having college kids. How has this affected your search for your kids to go to college? I know you have one in college and 2 more on the way. I mean, does this put a framework on what you guys are looking at?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely made us focus mainly on in-state schools. My 2 that are still in high school both play sports, so there may be scholarship possibilities with their athletics, where obviously we would look to whoever wants them and price that. But yeah, we're certainly looking at in-state schools. And frankly, for one, we're even thinking maybe the community college is the best way. I mean, Wake Tech has a soccer team. Maybe that's an avenue that he could do for 2 years and then transfer out. So we're bouncing everything around it, and obviously it just depends on what the opportunities. But if no scholarships aside, athletic or academic, I mean, in-state schools, as I mentioned, are still the best value for the dollar that North Carolina families can find.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your research with us and your reporting. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us a part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.